Thank you very much, Chair. So the OECD is really delighted to address this important meeting today. We are very glad of the invitation of AREA, the government of Indonesia, and the government of Japan. And I think that it reflects the high quality of the partnership between the OECD and AREA, and more largely in Southeast Asia. The OECD strongly believes in the value of international cooperation, which lies at the heart of its mandate, and this in many different policy areas, and in risk management in particular. This is in fact the reason why we created the OECD High-Level Risk Forum 3 years ago, and I'd be happy to share some of the lessons from that. Maybe just a few words on the OECD. We are an international organization gathering advanced economies driven by the objective to help governments globally to develop better policies for better lives, particularly sustainable and inclusive growth. We are 3,000 economists and policy analysts headquartered in Paris who strongly believe that economic analysis and international comparison can be instrumental to that end. The OECD is engaging strategically in Southeast Asia with a regional program which was adopted last year under the chairmanship of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe from Japan. And the idea of this partnership is to bring the OECD Southeast Asia relationship to a strategic level, to support domestic reform process and contribute to regional integration. If you look, in fact, our economic analysis of the region foresees a sustained growth in Southeast Asia in the years to come, driven by productivity growth, competitivity improvement, but still there are persisting challenges to avoid being caught in what we call the middle income trap. And to make this growth more sustainable, qualitative and inclusive so that it benefits to all. So this is what this partnership will be about. There was a major meeting last week here in Indonesia with our Secretary General to really continue on this way forward. It's a win-win situation. But that being said, what about risk management? Why, in fact, is OECD interested in this topic, in this public policy area? First of all, because crises, major disasters can result in large economic losses, which can affect our economies. And as you can see in this graph, the trend has been increasing over the last decades, but I think you all know that very well. But there are other reasons why we engage in that, is that because our governments are confronted with a sort of novel risk landscape characterized by complexity. There's been an evolution of the risk drivers over the last decades, along with major trends that are shaping up our societies. First, we've seen increased major shock events measured by their large scale, their novelty, their complexity, or also the transboundary impact that they can have, and their cascading effects, which are cascading not only across national borders, but also across sectoral borders as well, and not only affecting neighboring countries, but around the globe. This is partly due to increased vulnerabilities of our modern societies, with increased interdependency and interconnectedness of our cities, our nation, our economic sectors. This is all on the rise with the development of supply chains and critical infrastructures through which risks can cascade. In addition to that, the concentration of people and assets in cities, in coastal areas, are contributing also to these increased vulnerabilities of modern societies, as well as climate change. And in parallel to that, in fact, governments have seen their capacities being sort of reduced by other major trends, decentralization, privatization. They have less levels that they can activate when disaster happens. So this is a whole series of challenges, and OECD governments have set up the high-level risk forum to try to respond to these challenges. Just to illustrate the risk impacts that can spread across borders, you can see here a chart on global value chain participation, demonstrating that more than 50% of the economies of OECD countries depend on global supply chains. And this is also the same in Southeast Asia, which is a key region for global value chains. Past destructive shocks, such as the Great Japan earthquake or the general floods in Thailand, demonstrated how the high-risk exposure of our just-in-time and single sourcing models. So this calls for regional risk governance and global risk governance. These efforts in that domain are crucial for the resilience of our societies. This is a picture that shows the Honda factory car park in Bangkok during the floods in 2011. This shows you an impact on global supply chain. Floods also in Queensland in Australia had major impact on the price of minerals. And we calculated at the OECD that a major flood in Paris could have an impact up to 3 points of the national GDP. So to respond to these challenges, this is why we established a high-level risk forum 3 years ago to foster policy dialogue, exchange good practice across governments, with the private sector. We think it's absolutely crucial to work with the private sector, with the civil society as well, to improve risk governance. And this led to the development of an important result, the OECD recommendation on the governance of critical risk, which aims to ensure that governments develop robust frameworks for the governance of critical risk and their resilience to major shocks. It was adopted by OECD ministers last year, again under the chairmanship of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe from Japan. And it was a key contribution of the OECD to the Sendai framework. And we are quite happy to see that the framework recognizes governance as its second priority. There are 5 key principles here. I will not go to the details, but just to say that in each of these principles, there's a strong role for international cooperation. And this is what I want to highlight now. In risk assessment, we strongly promote the tool of national risk assessment, where you can compare all your risks in terms of their likelihood. This is the vertical axis, the likelihood increase when you go up, and their impact. This is the horizontal axis, and it increases when you go on the right. It has proven to be a very good tool to prioritize your resources and plan the development of capabilities, depending on the different priorities that you have. Countries, in fact, that we've been working with have been very much interested in learning from others, in sharing the methodology that they use to evaluate these likelihoods and these potential impacts, be it for a major flood, a pandemic, a terrorist attack. What are the methods that you use? And in fact, it's been highly beneficial to share these practices and these methodologies across countries that are having more or less the same risk profile. And I think that in Southeast Asia, you have many countries that do have the same risk profile in some respect. It can contribute to creating a common risk culture at the regional level. In terms of prevention, international cooperation can be highly beneficial in many different respects as well. You all know well that risk prevention starts by risk awareness. That's the first step. Developing joint risk awareness across borders is essential in a region where the mobility of workers, businessmen, tourists, goods, financial flows is on the rise. Secondly, international institutions are fundamental to address transboundary risks, transboundary hazards, in the most cost-effective way. You can see here on the map, it is the Mekong Shared River Basin. Well, cooperation here allows to prioritize prevention investments where they bring more benefits, be it in one country or in another one. The most important is to prioritize your investments where they bring the most benefits. An area also of great importance to reduce risk today is business continuity. Securing your supplies, ensuring the continuity of your value chains require to work internationally and with the private sector who works that way. And finally, it is about investments, which are also on the rise in your region. Foreign direct investment on one side, domestic investment on the other side. Your investments, the investments that you are doing in your neighboring countries as well, securing them requires also to know the risks abroad and to integrate them into planning and development, as well as to develop relevant standards and regulation in a coherent fashion at the regional level. If there is an area as well where international cooperation is particularly key, it is in emergency preparedness and response. It was very well explained, I think, by Mr. Faisal, director of AHS Center this morning. Well, first, data exchange and warning harmonization. It has been progressing a lot internationally and I think as well in the regions thanks to improvement in science and technology, as well as better institutional arrangements and governance. This works well for meteorology, for hydrology, for tsunami warning, health warning as well for pandemic. I think progress in climate science opens perspectives as well for new services. But you know, when crises are complex, you need to go beyond warning to develop sense-making capacities. I'll talk about that in just 1 minute. In emergency response as well, to face large-scale disasters, you need to engage with a variety of stakeholders, from the local up to the international level, and get the most of these partnerships. The key word here are subsidiarity and interoperability between your emergency forces and your systems. The HS Center demonstrates leadership in this domain. At the EU level also there are very good examples you can maybe learn more and exchange with that can inspire you. You have the Tetris system, for instance. All emergency forces can communicate, and this can be very useful when you work together on a common response. But yes, you know well that this is not enough. What are the characteristics of crisis today which we need to prepare for? Today, really, there are many crises that are changing crisis managers by their novelty, their complexity. They can bring deep uncertainties on the way to handle them, their potential consequences. They can threaten core societal values as well and play up tensions between stakeholders. Think about recent major crises in the region and in Asia in general, the Great Japan earthquake. To think of the ferry seawall in South Korea, how it had major impacts as well on the government. The MH370 in Malaysia. These are very complex crises. You need to understand what is going on. Traditional approach sometimes are not enough for that. This is why we established also at the OECD the network of strategic crisis managers to think about these complex crises, where basically you need to develop agility in your response network, capability to improvise, to go beyond standard operating procedures. Early warnings are not enough. You need to be able to understand complexity, to mobilize quickly, multidisciplinary expertise to understand what is going on and take the right response. What we do believe is that here there is a key role for strategic leadership to engage. It's absolutely fundamental to maintain trust when citizens' expectations are very high. So we have here this network to build knowledge and share lessons. Next meeting will be at the end of May in Geneva, Switzerland on crisis anticipation, and maybe participation of Southeast Asia in this workshop could be interesting. Finally, there's also a tool that we think is particularly interesting to improve policies. At the end of the day, this is to close the policy cycle. You need constantly to improve your risk management processes over time, and this is peer reviews. Peer review is at the core of OECD practice. Basically, it consists of an evaluation of public policy through a collaborative approach with peer reviewers from other countries. It's a great experience to learn from the others, to share experience, and it has proven to be very effective to enable policy reform with useful policy recommendation and inclusive dialogue. We've been doing that on risk management in a number of countries, Italy, France, Mexico, Japan as well as we've been working with the UNISDR to do that on the YOGO framework for action implementation. And we are very glad to see that this process of peer review has been included in the new Sendai framework. So we'll be very happy to promote this approach, to be working with you in the region, as we think that Southeast Asia could be a very good region to pilot this process for the new Sendai framework. Finally, to open perspective, I'd like to conclude by saying that this recommendation of the OECD on the governance of critical risks has been a key contribution to Sendai. We're happy to see governance recognized there, that there is a key role for the private sector and critical infrastructure that is mentioned as well in the Sendai framework, as well as the role of peer reviews. These were messages that we try to promote. We'll be working on developing a policy toolkit to share lessons on how to implement this OECD recommendation. And on developing further partnership with Southeast Asia on risk management, we think that there are many opportunities to discuss good practices for Southeast Asia eventually to participate in our cross-country analysis that we are conducting on natural risk assessment, risk communication, for instance, and we could also develop joint activities on peer reviews, thematic workshops, and so on. I would like to conclude by saying that there will be a visit at the OECD on May 5th, visit of ASEAN crisis managers to continue this joint dialogue and pursue collaboration further. Thank you very much.